This story is amazing. And I have to say, at the time of recording this, I still don't know what I'm going to title this video because there is sort of two parts to this. And normally I leave the LOL, oh my God portion of the videos to the end to kind of, bring you along through the whole video. But I got to show you. I got to show you this up front. So the first half of this video is going to be discussing how the rail industry is utilizing media right now to their advantage in a very specific way. And then I'll get to a new piece of legislation, a new bill that is being introduced by a couple of Democratic lawmakers to deal with the sorts of derailments that happen in East Palestine, Ohio. So first up here, this all stems from the Levers reporting that I have referenced now several times in discussing the disaster in East Palestine. This is the initial reporting that they put out, just the headline here. Rail companies blocked safety rules before Ohio derailment. That was out, as you see, on the 8th of February. And here is a certain reaction from a certain individual. This is Mr. Adam Wren. I'll let you know who he is in a second here. Adam Wren takes a screenshot of one of the articles from the Lever on this issue, and instead of, praising the reporting, the investigative reporting here in uncovering what happened, he instead criticizes the Lever, saying David Sirota's The Lever is fundraising off of the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment. So this is very standard when it comes to independent journalism. That's why they are independent. They're not relying on massive corporations to fund them. So yes, he's asking, or the Lever's asking at the bottom of this article that, hey, sign up here to help support our reporting. Okay, so I don't know how this can be an issue for anybody, but he's trying to make it sound like some evil scheme here. Adam Wren is the national politics correspondent for Politico. Interesting. What has Politico been up to recently? This reporting, also from the Lever. As regulators in Washington weigh new rail safety measures, Politico is running ads from the top railroad lobbying group about the industry's alleged commitment to safety as rail lobbyists fight new safety rules. So the national politics correspondent for Politico is criticizing the investigative outlet that uncovered the corruption at the heart of this story. And at the same time, Politico being funded by the rail industry. So here's what one example of how they are doing it. This is their Huddle newsletter. Now you go down, scroll a bit. Immediately you see here, presented by the Association of American Railroads. Interesting. Oh, but David, it's just a little headline here under the headline. They're not actually promoting rail safety. No, this is just, they probably already had, an ad buy, and this is how things work. So it's not like there's, a giant ad for railroads and safety in the middle of this newsletter. No, of course not. Oh, what's this? A message from the Association of American Railroads. When it comes to safety, 99.9% is not enough. While 99.9% of all hazmat shipments that move by rail reach their destination safely, we know a single incident can have significant impacts. That's why America's freight railroads will never stop working to improve safety and protect communities, workers, and the environment. This is so incredibly dishonest on both fronts. For Politico to have this while this story is still going on, while there's this discussion about rail safety is happening in the public eye, for them to put this into their newsletter, for them to take this money from the rail industry, and at the same time for the rail industry to do this, this is all while, so this is the link they link to here, learn more, talk about how safe it is, why freight rail is the safest mode for hazmat, all while the rail industry for years have been battling against any regulation at all of these very trains. So more than 1,000 trains derail in the U.S. each year, According to one estimate, a recent USA Today analysis found that hazardous material violations by rail companies appear to be climbing, with federal inspectors flagging 36% more infractions over the last 5 years than they did in the preceding half decade. So things are getting worse. 1,000 a year. And you have the rail industry and Politico allowing this message to go out about how safe it is, how safe trains are. Imagine there were 1,000 commercial flights that crashed each year, and shortly after one of those crashes, the airliners came out and put this ad together about how safe it is to fly, while at the same time battling any regulation or any investigation at all into that very crash. Because that's what's happening in this case. It is so dishonest. So while the rail industry here is claiming about how safe they are, here is a quick video here from Rebecca Burns at The Lever discussing what the rail industry has actually been up to.
One of the first places we often look when we're doing accountability reporting is lobbying records and seeing what they've been lobbying against. So it turned out that Norfolk Southern lobbied against better braking regulations, other safety requirements governing trains carrying hazardous materials. One of the other things that we found early on was that the train that derailed in East Palestine wasn't being regulated as what's known as a high hazard flammable train, even though it was flammable enough to require local evacuations. And so I think we had a moment where we thought, okay, does this mean that there isn't a story here? And then we thought, actually, this is sort of an even bigger story of regulatory failures spanning multiple presidential administrations.
So that's what the rail industry has been doing while they are claiming that they are committed to safety. Just to expand a bit on the point that Rebecca Burns there made, in 2015, as the rail industry was fighting to block an Obama-era rule that would have required railroad companies to use electronic braking technology on some hazmat trains, Vox published an ad from AAR touting the freight rail industry's relentless approach to safety, one in which good is never good enough. Just before the 2016 election, the Washington Post published branded content from the AAR in which the lobbying group president warned a key task for the new president and Congress must be to put the brakes on a federal agency whose regulatory actions are needlessly placing one of the nation's core industries at risk. And of course, the Trump administration then went on to repeal the electronic brake requirement in 2017. All of this going on while the rail industry lobbying group pretends that they are so committed to safety. One more point on the media thing here. So Media Matters. This is a whole other story, but I'll read you the headline and show you who this is. CNN commentator lobbied for Norfolk Southern, the company behind the train derailment in East Palestine. The network didn't tell its audience during the East Palestine discussion. So this is also how not just this industry, but various industries have their hands and money into media. They have these individuals like this guy here. I'm sure you've seen him before if you ever watched CNN, David Urban. They have paid various, commentators to help support their goals. Meanwhile, very rarely do these outlets ever actually disclose who they are representing in terms of the money they are taking. Going again to how key it is to be aware of who you're actually listening to when you're watching some of these shows or reading anything online. Now, let's get to the potential benefit in terms of a bill coming out of the Lever's reporting here, and I will show you how it is directly connected, how the Lever directly led to this. So, Ro Khanna here, releasing this. Following disastrous train derailment in East Palestine, Ro Khanna and Chris Deluzio introduced bill to protect Americans and hold railroads accountable. So this bill that they are introducing, if passed, the decreasing emergency railroad accident instances locally. I love how they get to these acronyms here. The Derail Act would direct the head of the Department of Transportation to modify the definition of high hazard flammable train to mean a single train transporting one or more loaded tank cars of a Class 3 flammable liquid or a Class 2 flammable gas and other materials the Secretary determines necessary for safety. Thanks in part to aggressive industry lobbying, the Transportation Department currently defines a high hazard flammable train as one carrying hazardous materials in at least 20 consecutive cars, or 35 total, limiting the number of trains subject to more stringent safety rules. How disgusting is that? That it's only considered hazardous if there's at least 20 consecutive cars, so they could get around that by putting some empty cars in between the ones with hazardous gas. 20 consecutive cars or 35 total, as opposed to, hey, maybe if one has a hazardous gas or material in it and that crashes, that alone is an issue. So why isn't the entire train, regardless of how many cars have this gas or hazardous material in it, why isn't it just considered hazardous if there's just one of them? It has to be 20 or 35. It's, again, going to how they attempt to skirt any attempt at a regulation as a way to save on their bottom line. Meanwhile, when it comes to stock buybacks, I already showed you in a previous video, I think it was around $8 to $10 billion Norfolk Southern did in stock buybacks. Meanwhile, months later, they laid off a bunch of people, leading again to more of a safety risk when you have a lack of workers or, a few people. I think on this train, there were 3 people. When you have a lack of staff to actually look over these trains and ensure that they're up to snuff, then you're going to have more crashes. So it's, there are a number of issues at play here, but it all comes down to a lack of regulation, which of course the industry has been fighting for this entire time. Now, this is how it helped lead to it. So as the Lever reported, the Norfolk Southern train that derailed in eastern Ohio and spilled toxic chemicals, including the flammable carcinogen vinyl chloride, was not being regulated as a high hazard flammable train due to a narrow definition of the category adopted by the Obama administration. The Obama administration in 2014 proposed improving safety regulations for trains carrying petroleum and other hazardous materials, the Lever noted earlier this month. However, after industry pressure, the final measure ended up narrowly focused on the transport of crude oil and exempting trains carrying other combustible materials. So as Congressman Chris DeLuzio, he's in Pennsylvania, but I believe his district neighbors, East Palestine, he writes here, "We can't trust giant corporations like Norfolk Southern to keep communities safe out of the goodness of their hearts. They're in it for profits, plain and simple. Today, I'm introducing the Derail Act with Ro Khanna to better regulate the railroads and put public safety first." And Ro Khanna here gives direct credit to Lever News reporting, highlighted this glaring gap in our regulations. It's time we put people's safety over corporate profits. So a independent news outlet funded by readers led to this investigative report that has now led to this bill that may in fact improve the regulations around the rail industry. Yet you have a place like Politico trying to smear them because they are independent, as opposed to taking money from the rail industry like a good media outlet does. Last thing here, I just want to acknowledge that Biden has even said something about this, or at least I should say acknowledged that there is a problem. Rail companies have spent millions of dollars to oppose common sense safety regulations, and it's worked. This is more than a train derailment or a toxic waste spill. It's years of opposition to safety measures coming home to roost. Which, it's good to see this talk, but talk is cheap, especially when he was the vice president under Obama, when the initial rules against hazardous material was fought by the rail industry. So, I'm sure he wasn't deeply involved in that discussion, or maybe he was, I don't know. But this is the first step, seeing this acknowledgement here, and we're going to have to see how far this bill goes. Again, it's going to be hard to get anything through when Democrats don't control the Senate and the House, and even when they do control both, as we saw in the first 2 years, very little gets done when you have people like Manchin and Sinema as the deciding factor in the Senate. But we will see with this one. This is just an obvious step. So I guess it's going to depend on how much the rail industry is willing to spend on lobbying to push back against these regulations.